Hello everyone, I'm Dante and welcome to another This Week in Anthem. It's been another mixed week for Anthem, with much needed improvements continuing to be patched. Community created UI ideas, a handy collectibles map, and the first public ban in Anthem. In the past few weeks since the launch of Anthem, we've already had a large number of changes and fixes, putting Anthem back into a state many expected from launch. This week continues these changes, but not to the same scale. Previously, I mentioned some changes to the player tethering, the system that decides you need to be teleported an extra 50 meters to the objective you can already see. Though the pop-up range has been increased, this new change means that you'll have more time to reach the objective, which is both a good and bad thing. On one hand, it means you should face less loading screens, but on the other, it means that the pop-up will be there for longer, which indicates to me that the mechanic is still triggering too often. As an alternative solution, I would suggest that we both increase its radius, but also change the core of the mechanic slightly. Rather than teleporting you, whether you want to be or not, what if it just asked, giving you, the player, the option to choose to be teleported if you're actually far behind, or just to catch up in your own time if you're just behind the person whizzing ahead at the front. The downside I can see from this is that people might just be lazy and choose to be teleported. But if they're going to choose to face a loading screen rather than fly for a minute, is that actually hurting anyone? The next two fixes are both to remove bugs that could and were exploited to gain more loot than intended. One corrected loot chests so that they no longer could be opened multiple times, drastically inflating their drop chances, and the second was a much larger exploit. The Swarm Tyrant is already considered the easiest boss, and thus an effective way to farm loot from strongholds. However, at the end of the fight, as the leaving mission countdown starts, the whole squad could quit the game and then restart Anthem, prompting a rejoin session button. If all 4 players did this together, you would still get the loot, but also reset the encounter, meaning you could guarantee high level loot drops over and over. These have now been removed, but with Anthem being about farming loot at its core, these aren't really big changes, just corrections in the line with what Bioware had intended. Though not part of the patch notes, Ben Irving this week responded to a post about the downstate issues. While downed, there is literally nothing you can do until you get picked up. You can't crawl, ask for help, spectate other players, or even open a menu. This last point is something the team are looking into. No timescales on implementation, but Ben did confirm that they will be adding access to the menus while in your down state. So you won't be able to see your loot or inventory, but in the worst cases you will be able to quit out of missions when you get stuck. Moving away from the developers and towards the community, one of the issues Anthem has with its loot is tied to raw information. There is no clear way to work out what your gear is doing, how much impact a different description has, or just to view what your javelin can do with a broad scope. The only way to work out this information right now is to get a spreadsheet and do it all yourself, which is frankly an oversight from Bioware. Fortunately, members of the community have been looking at ways Bioware can use the information they have on the back end and possible UI solutions. This one, made by Matthias M on Reddit, is easily the best one I've seen yet, with a much cleaner UI for the Forge and separating the screen into informative panels. There are essentially 4 regions. The left holds survival and magic find stats, the next is your character view, the third is your damage modifications, and the last is a highlight of your equipped items. All information that's important when you're trying to work on builds, your progress towards certain milestones you're aiming for, and just seeing what all these stats on your gear actually do. I really enjoy the minimalistic aesthetic, and this version really nails it for me, and if Bioware are to take inspiration from this, I hope they take it a step further, with items telling you the percent differences they make overall. List how the calculations are made, such as a specific damage boost from a masterwork. We should also have a specific breakdown or details page on the equipment themselves, to see detailed changes on what happens when we equip an item over a current one. But if I'm totally honest, at this point I'll just take a list of all the different stats currently equipped, like we get in Diablo 3 Details tab. At least it would be a start, and far easier to make than a UI overhaul. One additional post from Reddit I think is really useful, especially if you've not yet explored the whole map or are just missing 1 or 2 locations of cortexes, is this post that highlights all of the cortexes, discoverable locations, and possible world events. I've seen several of these maps going around of various qualities, and this is easily the most concise, and a great way for you to pick up any of those collectibles that have disappeared into the void of freeplay, as it's easy to miss many of these and even harder to work out where you might have missed them. The last Anthem related news I wanted to cover this week is something a bit more controversial, and really not something I was expecting to see from Bioware. Anthem has its first public ban in the game. Usually is something you associate with toxicity, hacking, or generally being bad for the community or game itself. However, from everything I've been able to find out about the ban, this is not the case. Not even close. A streamer and YouTuber by the name Glad was banned for exploiting the Anthem economy. This isn't someone I'm familiar with, but that's not really at the core of the issue. The issue is the reasoning. Exploiting the Anthem game economy. Not through hacking or anything like that, but by using bugs or mistakes on Bioware's part to generate masterworks faster than intended. He made a video covering this ban and what he's done that could have resulted in this happening. Primarily, this stems back to an issue that you're probably aware of, the looting circuits of chests in freeplay, and though he wasn't the only one using it, or the originator of the post explaining it, he did use it a lot. But this itself is by no means a reason to ban anyone. That's a mistake on Bioware's part that was corrected within days of being discovered. He had also tried out some of the other exploits, such as the Storm Ultimate spamming, but again this was a previously known about bug. None of these seem like reasons to ban anyone. So either there is something else that isn't public knowledge, or Bioware has made a mistake here. And I'm inclined to believe him. Regardless of the cause, it highlights an issue. Anthem at its core is a co-op loot game. It has no trading, no PvP, no ranking, and no real benefit from being the first to do anything. So how can you truly break an in-game economy to the point that you're detrimental to the game, its community, or those you play with? Worst case, you reveal an issue that wasn't intended and the devs can fix it. And from what I've seen, this is exactly what Glad has done. With Anthem's current issues, technical and content related, there are very few promoters of the game in the influencer space. Most have used it as a platform to put down Bioware and EA, and despite that, Bioware have handled it well, by being open with the community and recognizing that they've made mistakes. But this situation right now looks like a misstep on their part. I'm sure they've had a policy against speaking out about corrective actions, but they need to make an exception in this case or reverse the ban. Anthem is a loot game at its core, and players always find the most efficient way to get that loot. That's half of the fun of these games to many people. So if finding the most efficient routes and ways to get loot drops becomes a way to get yourself banned, Anthem is in serious trouble. This would have been the end of this week's episode, but due to my internet being down for several days, the story has had much more time to develop, including another video from Glad on Bioware's response and what their ban was for, which I'll link below. In short, it was specific to the Storm exploit, which he then promoted, if only a little. Using this glitch after discovering it broke the terms of service and led to his ban. They followed up at the start of this week with an email explaining this to him, and have since removed his account ban for Anthem. Alongside this, they explain that cheating makes the experience worse for others, which in most cases is true, but this becomes a large grey area when you're talking about a PvE only game. And it's here that Glad has a pretty strong point, which to me links into a much larger issue with the games as a service model. Historically, exploiting in a PvE game has been unpunishable, and in most cases, more entertaining than damaging. That's where a large part of the speedrunning community sits, and that's why there are so many categories in speedrunning, including different types of glitches for different runs. But in the modern era of games, something has shifted, and this is in part due to games as a service. This new model promotes the use of microtransactions to extend a game's life with new content that would have previously been part of DLCs or expansions. This new format allows for a larger quantity of these updates and balances to be released over time to keep the game progression going, often revolving around looting or other long-term goals for the players, which in theory is pretty good for both consumers and developers, in that the game has long-term support. The players get new things to try in a game they like, and both get to build a community around an IP, which is essentially the model of a subscription MMO, but with the possibility of playing for free. Unfortunately, this isn't truly what we get with games as a service. In all cases that I can think of, the trust given by the consumer has been abused in two key ways. The first is to artificially slow the rates of progression, primarily in gear drops, and secondly to offer incentives for real money, often in unfair formats like loot boxes. This is a topic I could literally talk for hours on, so before I get carried away, how does this link back into Anthem? Well, Anthem uses a terms of service that you would associate with a game with a form of competitive nature, such as Destiny, whose main draw in the long term comes from PvP, so loot that you have directly affects someone else playing the game, so using an exploit to gain gear faster or to deal more damage than intended is a huge game-breaking change, but in Anthem, there is no PvP, and currently no way to compete with anyone, as leaderboards and raiding aren't in the game, so you can't use an exploit for an unfair advantage, which causes an issue. And it's clear their terms of service is ready for content, but Anthem hasn't delivered on any of it just yet. And even if they had, the action taken in this situation would still have been too much. In all, this situation has been a PR nightmare, and shows another issue with Anthem in terms of how it enforces its rules, which I'm sure will be reviewed following this situation, and likely corrected. But the damage has been done, and now I'm concerned for Anthem, and BioWare. There is a great game here, the potential is still so high, and it can be put back on course. My concern now is that they won't have time to deliver on it. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Anthem. If you found this video useful, please leave a like, or a dislike if you prefer. You can support the channel by subscribing, and use the bell to be notified of future content as it goes live. Until next time, I've been Dante, thanks for watching.